Welcome back to Torah on the Go. Whether you are in the car or walking your dog on the Peloton, we are glad that you're spending a few minutes learning Torah with us. I am sitting next to my podcast partner, Rabbi Feinstein.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're glad to be together.
Last week we talked about the plagues, and we talked about the concept of all of the plagues and the emotional journey of it all. There's so many details in the book of Exodus that it's hard to cover each individual verses. There are so many great verses. This week I'd like to talk about the delicious details of our delivery. There are so many great little details that occur in the Torah that we rarely have time to stop and appreciate each and every one. But at the very beginning of Exodus 12, before we're even out of Egypt, God tells Moses, and we have to think, this would be the message that God tells Moses right before we're freed from slavery. HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim, right? This is the time for you that will be Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is actually the first mitzvah that's described to Moses upon being freed, upon encountering freedom. Even before the Passover ritual, even before the holiday, Rosh Chodesh is discussed. There is a kind of, a practice, let's say, in Judaism of sanctifying time. Mm-hmm. We do it constantly.
Yeah.
People think about it in terms of Shabbos, but in terms of holidays, the high holidays, Passover, these seminal moments. But actually, it's all throughout our day. Every day, we sanctify time. We constantly are counting. And there's something about counting that makes you free. That makes you feel like you're in control of the time rather than the time controlling you.
Right. Look, we as Jews have an obsession with beginnings. And we all know that Rosh Hashanah, the first of the year, is our high holiday. Now just think about that for a minute. That the most important holiday of the year is New Year's. It's because we believe in sanctifying beginnings, because it represents our moral freedom and our moral agency, that we can create the lives and create the world that we wish to create. But the Talmud comes along and says, no, it's not one Rosh Hashanah, it's four. For different purposes. There's Rosh Hashanah for trees, and Rosh Hashanah for taxes, and Rosh Hashanah for kings. And then if you count, as this Torah portion does, the first of the month as a kind of Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Chodesh becomes a Rosh Hashanah. It's like 13 more times during the year you're celebrating beginnings. And of course, the first word in the Torah is in the beginning. So there's this obsession with beginnings, and it's exactly for this reason tied to this story. We are not stuck. The past does not define us. The past does not bind us. We have the power over and over again in life to stop and say, how did I get here? And where do I really want to be going? That notion of tshuva, which means turning around, returning, but turning. That notion of taking in your own hands the moral agency to shape the life that you wish to live, shape your character, start again, is the gift of this Torah portion.
Perfect. So we're moving forward. We're sanctifying beginnings, and right following that, chapter 12, verse 14, God says, "Vayehi bayom hazeh lachem lezikaron v'chagotem oto chag la'Adonai ledorotechem." And it shall be this day that you remember forever.
That's great.
The holiday.
It's a
forever
wonderful thing.
For all generations.
Right in the middle of the drama,
That's
he
right.
stops and says, "Oh, and we're going to make this." It's like if Benjamin Franklin had stood up at the Continental Congress on July 4th and said, "Oh, guys, we'll do fireworks and
Right.
we'll have barbecues
Right.
and we'll." It breaks the narrative, is what it does.
We have a certain momentum as a people that we're constantly driving forward, and at the same time, we're remembering backward.
Yeah.
But that's the nature of who we are.
Exactly.
And
Right.
this parsha explains it. Explains that we're going to be leaving Egypt and remembering Egypt. It's this very strange relationship that we have with Egypt and this entire Exodus experience. Because if you go through something terrible, most of the time we tell people, years from now, you'll not even remember that this happened.
Right. Time heals all wounds.
Right. But we would be bad chaplains. We'd be bad rabbis if we sat with people and we said, every year you should remember that this horrible thing happened to you.
Well,
precisely at this time.
But there's a question. Because before we end this narrative, there's a really painful question, which was, if God is in charge of our fate, why did God put us through this? And the answer is beginning to be formed here, which is this was a formative experience. This was a formative experience that will give us our ethics. It's the formative experience that will give us our vision of history. It was the formative experience that will help us understand how we're to shape the world and heal it. This is a formative experience, and therefore it must be preserved, but in a very interesting way. You ever notice that on your Seder plate, there's 5 things, 6 things on a Seder plate, only one is bitter?
Right.
The liberation is going to be highlighted far and above the slavery experience, because that's the experience that's really going to shape us. But here, in the middle of the narrative of the liberation, you stop. You stop the narrative, and you were a filmmaker.
Right.
So what do you call it in filmmaking when the actor turns toward the camera, breaks out of character, and starts talking directly to the audience?
We call that Woody Allen.
Yeah, exactly right. But that's what's happening. Like, kids, I want you to remember this moment now. We're about to leave Egypt. Remember, don't forget. It's a remarkable breaking of the narrative, or the fourth wall,
right,
as it were, in a drama. And you introduce, here's how this is going to be remembered years from now.
Yeah, it's called exposition. And you're not supposed to do it directly. You're supposed to have 2 characters speaking to one another, and it just comes out naturally in dialogue.
Right.
I can't believe that we're going to leave this place and our kids are going to forget. No, they won't forget. They're going to remember forever.
Right.
But here we receive an instruction. Right. There will be a holiday we're supposed to remember every year for all generations, for the end of time, this memory of this place that we're about to leave.
A crazy holiday where you're supposed to take your
That's right.
tear your refrigerator apart and your kitchen apart, and then spend a fortune on food that you really didn't want to eat anyway.
Right. And so I'm going to go to the next one now. Your children ask you, "Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem?"
Oh yeah.
So even in the Torah, it anticipates in this moment that this holiday is going to be a little bit strange. The memory, the idea of remembering this is going to be a little bit strange. And the ones in our houses that are going to definitely ask us why we're doing this are going to be our children. This is a holiday between parents and grandparents and children to explain where we came from and the origin of our story.
Yeah. Now, again, you have to forgive me for the movie references, but there's a whole genre of movies where at some point the kid starts to figure it out, and the parents say, "Son, daughter, we're not who you think we are.
Right.
Come down to the basement. Let me show you something." Right. And either they turn out to be Russian agents or they turn out to be coneheads. They're from another planet. Superman says to his father, "Something's weird, Dad."
Right.
And he says, "Oh, son, let me tell you where you really came from."
Right.
Right? That's what this is. The Torah anticipates at this point in the story, your kids are going to say, "Who are we?"
Right.
And you'll tell them, and here's the beginning of the story. You'll tell them this story. This story during the doubling effect is, as the Torah is telling us the story, it's telling us, reminding us to tell our kids the story when the time comes to tell us the story.
That's right. I heard a great drush from the one and only Rabbi Alana Zimmerman. She was talking at Mincha Mariv, and she gave the drush that this completes the ark. The ark begins with Pharaoh explaining to the Jewish people that he's going to kill all of their children, all their sons. And it ends with God assuring us that till the end of time, we will tell this story to our children.
Right.
Meaning we will have children forever and ever and ever and ever. We'll not ever face a time like that again. Yeah. And in so many ways, it's a heartwarming moment to think that parents and children will sit and tell each other the origin of the Jewish tradition. Because this is such. I have to keep going, but to the other. So the next verse, the next delicious detail, is we talk about the drama, we talk about the filmmaking, the epic nature of this entire narrative,
Right? And
then the verse that describes us being freed is perhaps the most boring verse of the entire book of the Torah. Okay, so I don't even know if people pay attention to it, but Exodus 12 verse 51 states, Vayehi ba'etzem hayom hazeh. So in the midst of the day, just at some moment, it's not even like an important. In some moment of the day, Hotzi Adonai et bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim al tzivotam. God took out, God saved, God removed the children of Israel from the land of Egypt, legion by legion, group by group.
Yeah, basically they left.
They left, right.
They wiped their feet on the mat and walked out of Egypt.
At some point during the day, they all just walked out.
Yeah, bad semayomas. Basically, they walked out.
So how do we make sense of this? We waited for hundreds of years, according to the Torah, for this moment.
Yeah.
The moment comes, and the moment is not the reward. It's a journey.
I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to move the mood from something light to something deeply heavy.
Sure.
You are the grandchild of 4 Holocaust survivors.
That's right.
How did they tell you about their liberation?
They never, ever described a moment where they walked out of the camps.
They didn't.
They never. They never. Only my grandfather, who I'm named after, Papa Nathan, told a story that what happened essentially is that the guards one day disappeared, right? So the guards from the camps disappeared, and he ran into a village in Poland, and he was begging people to take him in, and nobody would take him in. And so he was hiding in a barn. Eventually, he kept making his way village after village after village, barn to barn to barn, and he came across a group of American soldiers.
Wow.
And in the group of American soldiers, in the unit, there was one Jewish soldier. The Jewish soldier took off his coat and gave it to him, walked him up to the house, and said to the person who owned the house, "This is a friend of ours. If one hair on his head is touched until the time that we come back, we're going to come back and destroy this whole town."
Wow.
And the person took him in and fed him 3 times a day and gave him a bed. And so his story was never about the moment that he left. None of them have a story because my grandmother walked on the death march.
Yeah.
And she was basically knocked unconscious and she was woken up by a Soviet soldier. My other grandmother, they all had. The stories were all about where they were going. There was never this moment of walking out of the camps. None of them had that experience.
That's beautiful. See, but I imagine, so I can imagine, I have a similar story about my uncle who was in the camps, that what the Torah is inviting us to do is just that.
Right.
At this point, put the Torah down, look up from the table, and tell your kids how you got out of Egypt, or how Uncle Nathan got out of Egypt,
Right.
or how my Uncle Henry got out of Egypt.
Right.
And that's because you can't capture that experience
Right.
except in a personal testimony like that. It's no
Right.
longer the national narrative. It's a deeply personal narrative. Wow, what a story.
Right. There is, though, and again, we go back to filmmaking, there are so many attempts to try to capture this moment.
Yeah.
So many attempts. And I feel as though the Torah has, and I hate to say this, like grammatically it's reflected in the language itself, there is almost no present tense in the Torah.
It's true.
There's only a past and a future. And actually, the future is told through a past tense in the Torah. It's very tricky. The grammar of the Torah is tricky.
Very tricky.
So there is no present. And so to say in the moment, this is what the children of Israel felt, and again, I just went to a past tense verb to even say that, it feels as though there is no way that the Torah can even express it. That's not what we're supposed to be thinking about. How am I doing right now? Is not a question that the Torah invites us to ask.
That's a really wonderful observation.
Yeah, and it's a I don't know. I always that verse always comes and goes, and we read past it very quickly. And I always think to myself, wow, what a nadir of drama. What a low point of drama. That sentence could have been written a whole different way, and we act according to all these different rules. And the very last delicious detail I'll bring up in chapter 14, before we begin the splitting of the sea episode next week, is the place that the children of Israel end up in chapter 14 is a place called Pi HaCherut. And if you don't speak Hebrew, you don't understand how beautiful that is. But the town is the city, whatever we want to call this, the place of sand where they camped out as opposed to the place of sand that they came from, is this place called the Mouth of Freedom. Pi HaCherut. And I just think that they didn't get from Egypt to the land of Israel in one straight shot. The Torah drops hints that we will move in stages, and the first stage is to get to this place called Pi HaCherut, the mouth of freedom. We're not even ready for freedom. We don't get to freedom. We get to a gateway.
The echo of freedom.
Right, the echo of freedom.
The voice of freedom.
The voice of freedom, that's right.
Yeah. You begin to hear it. You
Right.
begin to wonder, is this really happening?
That's right.
Is this really happening?
And it happens because, we start there and we're not even at the splitting of the sea. We're not even at Sinai. We're not at all. There's so many episodes that are about to come our way that describe to us the beginning of freedom. But we end this entire narrative with this detail of this place where we were camped out. And the Torah calls it Pi HaCherut. I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful detail to end chapter 12, 13, and 14 to say we made it out of Egypt. We learned about the calendar. We learned how to tell time. We learned about this holiday that we're going to celebrate every single year. We walked out in this moment that's very, that's non-memorable. And we ended this place that's not Egypt, that's not Goshen, that's not Israel, that's not Sinai, that's not any of these other places, these locations that we know. We end up at this place called the gateway to freedom, or the mouth of freedom, or the voice of freedom, the echo of freedom, the first notion of liberation.
Yeah. It's one of those life experiences that you look back on and you say, what happened?
Right.
And where was I? And did that really just happen?
Right.
Did that really just happen? And this people is so shaken because they're in a place they've never been before. There are no taskmasters beating them. There's no pyramids to build. There's no bricks to shape. There's no Pharaoh to be afraid of. And yet they don't know what freedom tastes like yet. It's just beginning.
Right. It's
just beginning. And they're being led by this fellow Moses who they still don't quite trust and don't understand.
Right. And it all begins here. It's like when people tell you the story of their lives, the very first apartment.
Yeah.
That story we got married and we moved into this apartment. I don't know why, but the rule is that in a story like that, the apartment always has to be crummy. Right? You always have to say the apartment was awful. It has to be. That's a standard trope, right? Is that you move, the first apartment has to be awful, and then you build and build and build and build. You build your lives together, and you end up in a home that's beautiful. And it feels like Pi HaCherut, the beginning of that journey, the opening of that journey in some way. This is how the story has to begin.
Well, again, to take the names, because I think that's a wonderful observation. Mitzrayim, which is the word of the Bible for Egypt, from the word tsar, meaning narrow. It's the narrows. It's the binding place. It's the place of bondage, of being bound up, of being restricted and constrained. And you now take one step, you can breathe. Wow. Maybe we're really free.
Right.
Maybe this is really happening.
Right.
Maybe we're not being chased. Maybe we're not being. Maybe.
Right. And in fact, they're not sure, because next episode we're going to talk about how they
don't give it away.
They were chased. Yeah. I don't want to spoil it for anybody.
Don't spoil it. The suspense of the next episode. Tune in next week.
Tune in next week. Well, we hope you've enjoyed learning with us this week, and we look forward to sitting down with you and spending some time next week. If you have any questions at all that you'd like for us to address during any of these episodes, please email them to us at the VBS podcast page. Has all of the information. And we don't do this enough, but I want to offer a special expression of gratitude, a special thanks to our one and only Ian Starr, who is the producer. I was watching my favorite podcast. I mean, my favorite podcast is Torah on the Go. But then second, Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. And they always thank everybody involved. And I thought to myself this week when I was listening, we should do the same. So thank you, Ian, for everything. And we look forward to studying with you next week.